Tomas. Nice to meet you today.
From 0 to 1, so we start with 0, that's beginning somewhere.
Yeah, beginning.
How far is 1? Is that everything, or is it the early stage of the career? Or?
Yeah, stage of the career, but I think we call it 1, but I think to me you are 100.
Okay.
Yeah, you're 100. I'm probably 0.1. So long way to go, long way to go. So Thomas, you were born in Sweden.
Yeah.
In the 30s. It seems like a very long time ago. So what was it like growing up in Sweden in the 40s or 50s?
Well, Sweden was relatively well protected from the worst effects of the Second World War. Mm-hmm. Because it's geographically a very large country, so it would be very costly to invade it. On the other hand, much of it doesn't have a lot of resources other than trees and so on. So there was no interest, no serious interest from any of the big powers to devote a lot of effort to invade Sweden. Otherwise, Sweden would have been like Norway and Denmark, its neighbors who were involved in the war. But they have a coastline, important coastline against the Atlantic, and Sweden does not. So, from that point of view, we escaped tragedies that were so obvious in many other countries. But that still meant, of course, shortage of material and rationing of certain foods and so on, and absence of imported foods. I didn't see banana until I was 6 or 7 years old. I remember that was an amazing fruit.
Banana. Now we see every day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you went to school in Sweden, and how was it like when you were a student in school?
Well, Sweden was and still is a good place to study, because there is some discipline, but also you get a little bit of extra time to pursue your own thoughts. And this is a very difficult balance to get right. If you don't guide and help people move forwards, it's more difficult for them. But you don't want to be so instructive and overload them all the time that they don't have time to think for themselves.
Mm-hmm. So they need certain freedom, and you had
yes,
the right
some
amount of freedom in Sweden. Okay. And we heard that you failed your chemistry course, and you are a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. So what happened? Why did you fail your chemistry?
Well, even in the system of Sweden, I had several excellent teachers there, and a couple of teachers that weren't very good. And this was one of them, and he and I didn't like each other. So he, as long as he was the senior, he could, during the year I studied in his class. He didn't like me and talked back too much.
Would you say you were a naughty student, or you were a good student?
No, well, somewhere in between, I think.
So it's personal.
Yeah.
I guess. Okay.
Yeah.
So we found you have many interests, a lot of hobbies, like wine tasting.
Yes, that comes partly through my family, but I think it is important to have an open mind about things. I think it has helped me to think in a broad way and have many interests in different forms of art, music, paintings, and I think this is a very good thing to have a broad attitude, because that means also teaches you to think broadly and not follow what everybody else is saying. And that can be important in science, try to think a bit differently from other people.
Yep. So all of your hobbies give you inspirations.
Yes, I think so.
Nice.
And I can show you some of the pictures around the wall here.
Yes, please. Yeah, we saw a Chinese painting.
Yes, it's an important painter.
Okay, so I guess winning the Nobel Prize must be a very happy moment, or not. But I wonder if there are any other things that make you equally happy or even happier.
Well, those are very different things in life, you know, having a partner and a good family and so on. But regard to the Nobel Prize, that is recognition by your colleagues, and that's always very attractive to a scientist, that other people in the field have some interest and respect in what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for your work, it was very groundbreaking, because when I read the history of DNA repair, people didn't even think DNA can be damaged. And you realized that DNA is actually not stable. Yeah. So how and when did you realize that DNA wasn't stable?
It was a gradual process. As a postdoc, I was working on RNA, the conformation of RNA, and transfer RNA molecules. And I did some experiments trying to figure out how they unfolded under different conditions. And then some of those experiments took some time and required use of higher temperatures to unfold the RNA and so on. And I was annoyed to find that the RNA seemed to get damaged or decompose while I was working with it. And my colleague said it was my fault. You know, you have ribonuclease on your fingers, and if I improved my lab technique and kept my fingers out of the solutions, things would be okay. I know that wasn't the explanation, because I had done that RNA myself, and there was nothing wrong with it. And besides, I then repeated my experiments. If you get an odd result, it's important to go back and do it over again. If you get the same odd result again, it means something. It's not just some technical problem. So the fact that the RNA was degraded when it was heated for long times was a real finding. And nobody else thought that was interesting. So I had another research project on the conformation of RNA and so on, but as a side product, with the permission of my professor, I could spend a little bit of time figuring out what was happening. And I even wrote a little paper about this, which was ultimately published in Journal of Biological Chemistry. And we left it at that. Nobody thought this was interesting. It made me think, though, and this was one of the best ideas I've had, that if RNA can decompose like that, not due to finger nuclease, but due to its intrinsic property, perhaps DNA, although DNA is more stable than RNA, is not quite as stable as people had thought. So I decided that sometime in the future, when I've got my own facilities, I would look into that. Mm-hmm. And then nothing happened while I completed my postdoctoral training and so on. So for a couple of years I didn't work on this, and nobody else had picked up on it in the meantime. And then I went back to decided when I had my own lab, one of the projects I wanted to do was label the DNA radioactively in the bases or in the different bases, or in so you could follow exactly what happened to it. And that's because I was looking for slow decomposition of DNA. I found it, and nobody had done that experiment before.
Mm. Yeah. So it's always good to pick up something that nobody has ever done before.
Yes.
Yeah. Did anybody think you were crazy to think about that, or?
Not really. They thought, yeah, perhaps
it's true.
You could always do that, but they were slow experiments. DNA doesn't fall apart so quickly, and people now want to do quickie results.
Yeah.
And this was a good old-fashioned biochemistry that took a long time to do, and you could only do it at the bench. There were not so many computers around in those days.
Yeah, good old days.
But you couldn't have solved this problem with the computer anyhow. You actually have to go in and do the classical biochemical experiments.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, these are grant reviewers, like your hypothesis.
Pardon?
These are grant reviewers when you like applying for research grants, like your hypothesis that DNA is not stable. Like, what are their comments on that?
Yes, here is. I had a little bit of money to investigate chain breaks in DNA, and obviously, if I had come up with this rather bizarre idea, they would have said, "Are there any preliminary experiments that indicates there's anything to support this idea?" And if you don't have any preliminary experiments, you'll probably get dismissed. And the only way to solve this problem is that you borrow a little bit of money from your main research budget and do some little experiments on the side to see if there's anything to it. And that's how I started out with this. I decided to look at stability of DNA. And if DNA had been as stable as everybody thought, I wouldn't have seen anything, and then I would quietly drop that project and done something else. But since I then observed that DNA is slowly decomposing, when you did some simple calculations, you realize quickly that this means there are thousands of lesions in the DNA in every cell in one day. And that's so much of a chemical change that just can't be tolerated. So there must be some explanation of this. One explanation would be that the DNA in the cell was protected. But that seemed unlikely to me, because the damage was just damage due to water damage, hydrolysis. And we have water in our cells too. There is no obvious explanation how you could prevent hydrolysis inside a cell. The other thing is, of course, that perhaps this is really the fact, and if so, there has been slow repair of the DNA going on all the time. And it was known that DNA could be repaired after radiation damage, sunlight damage or ionizing radiation. So it's not so far-fetched to say if there's slow hydrolysis of DNA that you can't avoid, that could also be repaired by related mechanisms. So that's what we started looking for, and then as time goes, we found repair enzymes that with the predicted properties. So that was not a chance discovery. That was something that we actually looked for because of the basic finding that DNA is less stable than people have thought.
Yes. Mm-hmm. You were once the director of Clyde Hall Laboratories.
Yeah.
And you have mentored many students in your life, I guess. So what do you think makes a good mentor?
Well, a good mentor, again, as I just touched on education, you have to be helpful and supportive, and also see to it that people have a chance to encourage your young co-workers to think for themselves, because this is what science is very much about. You are not just a technician, but you're supposed to do something interesting, and you can do something interesting much better if you take a real interest in what you are doing. If you can create an atmosphere where your co-workers think that they really like what they are doing, and that it's almost like doing science like a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
That you enjoy doing it. It's not a job, but something that's really inspiring. That's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree. But nowadays, I think doing research can be a little bit stressful, at least to me.
Yes, that is a problem. That there are so many demands now. And also with all the new technologies coming along and so on, that you have to somehow find the time to think for yourself. And that goes back to your supervisors and organization. They have to set, in my opinion, it's very important to set aside some time where you can do what really interests you yourself. So if you have a research project, which you will have, and you spend most of your time on that research project, but you shouldn't spend 100% of your time on that, because then you're just doing your boss's work for him. Some 10-20% of your time should be earmarked that you can actually try to follow up on something that interests you yourself. And the most productive way of doing that is to do experiments. And you will soon find that not all the results come out the way you had predicted. And then you should have the time to find out what's the difference. That's where good training comes in, because you don't want to spend your time on chasing trivial explanations that you have done something technically wrong.
Yeah.
But if you feel confident that the work you did with your own hands was good, there's nothing wrong with it, and still the result wasn't what you expected. Don't say it didn't work. It did work. Nature is just trying to show you that nature is smarter than you are, and you have to figure out what's the difference.
Yeah, it could point to a new possibility that nobody else has discovered before.
Yes.
So what abilities do you think are most important for PhD students or postdocs?
To have the curiosity and interest to wanting to pursue something, and really like doing it, because doing science, it takes up a lot of your time, and I can think of other areas in life where you can make more money. So although we have the occasional exceptions, some colleagues who have been lucky and patented something and become rich and whatnot, but that's not why you do science, because most of us won't become rich. But you can carry on comfortably.
Yeah, yes, definitely. So we should have curiosity and passion.
Yes.
Yeah, two most important
And
things.
that is the way artists function. And that's, we'll come to that, a painter or a good pianist and so on. If you want to play the piano, you can't say, I don't want to practice. It's tedious. You have to want to play every day.
Mm-hmm. So we should also be very hardworking.
Yeah, because there's a lot of competition out there, and unless you're hardworking, you have to be absolutely exceptional.
Yeah,
if you're competing with a lot of smart people who are working much harder than you do.
How do you think our way of doing research has changed compared to people in the 60s or 70s?
Well, there's a lot of new technology, so which is helpful. But otherwise, it's still, fortunately so, that nature is smarter than us in many cases. And some of the really new discoveries that are going to be made over the next several years will be chance observations, a result that wasn't expected. And it just has to be followed up and explained. And that explanation might then open a whole new field of research.
Well, this question about U.S., the difference between U.S. and U.K. You worked in the U.S. for your postdoc? And
Yes.
then you came to Sweden
And
and
at
UK.
that time, Europe was still rather formal in some ways. So it was nice to go to the U.S. and see that, you are on first name basis with the professors, even if you are a young beginner and so on. And they are not so interested, and that was a good thing with the United States in those days, that it wasn't so much the formal position you had, but if you had any new ideas or could contribute to the scientific discussion. And that was a bit of an eye-opener to me coming from Sweden. Since then, I think things have changed so that they have become more similar. US is a bit more formal, and Europe is a bit less formal, so they have come together. And as I already mentioned, I worry a little bit about the formality in China, that the people in charge want to exercise their power all the time and not let young people like you get on with it and try to do something interesting by themselves. That doesn't mean that you should each have a lab of your own without any direction or anything like that. You should work on the main topic, but in addition to that main topic, you should have the chance of doing some experiments on something that interests you and see it. And certainly both I and several colleagues of mine have tried to encourage our postdocs to pursue their own project like that, little thing. And if it works, they can take it with them when they leave the lab, and then they have a good start where they go.
Yeah.
That's very generous.
Yeah, it is.
Is it happening, Chris?
I think so. Yeah, a lot of postdoc in my lab, they have some like side project,
Yeah.
and then they can take away after they
Yeah.
get a position.
Yeah. And one has to accept, that most of the side projects probably won't work for all kinds of reasons. So it's just perhaps your basic idea wasn't right, or
Unlucky.
something didn't work out, or it was too ambitious or something like that. And it's very important to have common sense saying that, no, enough is enough, this doesn't seem to go anywhere. don't give up immediately if things don't work immediately. You have to stick with it for a while. But at some point you have to be able to say that I'm probably better off doing something else. Huh?
Yeah. So maybe we can ask one China-related question, and then we can connect with people online. So you have been to China quite a few times, and you've given speeches and connected with researchers over there.
Yeah.
So what do you think of the science and the research happening in China right now?
Well, first let me say I'm very impressed with the serious support that research is having in China. There are other countries where their research seems to be not the top priority anymore. But in China, they are willing to support basic research and the costs taken up by that. So I think that if it continues like that, I would be surprised if in another 20, 30 years, China is the world's leading country with regard to research, a position now held jointly by the United States and Europe.
Mm-hmm.
But that requires, in my opinion, a little bit of a change of an attitude. But from what I've seen in China, it's too directed from the top, and young people have not enough time or support to try to pursue their own ideas. Mm-hmm. So this is what I've already alluded to. They should have a main project which is run by the boss of their laboratory, and that should take, let's say, 80% of their time. But then in addition to that, you should give young people the chance, little bit of money, but not much, and the facilities to work. So if you are willing to come to the lab in the evening or over the weekend, you think the work is interesting, that you are willing to do that, then it's important that there is positive support for that, rather than going out playing various kind of sports or something like that.
Yeah, I agree with your suggestions. Yeah, and recently, to my knowledge, I think there are some new fellowships in China that invest in people itself rather than the project, so the people will have more freedom to pursue their own ideas.
I think that's a very good idea.
Yeah, I agree. So we should keep doing that.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's now take a look at how Sir Tomas Lindahl collaborates with scientists in China. We will be joined by special guest Dr. Ningning Li from Sangyaseng University to continue our interview.
Hi, Sir Thomas. Hi, Madame.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you and see you.
Okay, let me
Nice seeing you
make
again.
it louder. Yeah. I see you look very well, and Madame look thinner and trying to lose weight or something. I'm gaining weight.
You're
I'm very happy to see you.
lovely to see
I
you
don't want
too.
to.
Very nice to see you
So,
again.
sorry, you go ahead. Very, very, very happy because both the hospital president, Professor He Yulong, and also would like to express his gratitude and say hi to both of you.
Please say hi back to him.
Because he is still in the surgery room, so he couldn't attend our meeting.
Oh.
But I heard Jin Kun is and Hu Gang are interviewing you guys, so I was so excited. Since 2018, Yin and I did a tremendous job to have the honor to bring the Thomas Lindahl Nobel Laureate Laboratory in the 7th Affiliated Hospital. So this is in the this is in the Chinese, but we can. But I think Sir Thomas knows that. And in 2018, May 2018, and the hospital opened And then in 2018, September 2018, and all the leaders in the 7th affiliated hospital of Sun Yat-sen University went to Francis Crick. So at that time, Yin is here, and I. So we visited both two labs. One is where Yin stayed, and one is where I stayed with Axel Barons. So this is a time in 2019, 1 year later, or not even 1 year. 1 year later, we have the Tomas. This is a Chinese translation for Tomas Lindahl, and then we have back and forth and visiting here and there. And unfortunately, the pandemic happened, so we couldn't. But I think notably, Ying sent a small squad and several members in the Francis Crick, and then continued the work. So we have in the Guangming district of Shenzhen city, we had four first. First, we had Professor Thomas Lindahl and Axel Barons. We had the Chunhui scholar as a postdoc in Axel Barons' lab, and imported also to the 7th affiliate hospital. We have Thomas Lindahl. We have the William Richardson from UCL. Mm-hmm. And here is the event of the May 2019. We had the Thomas Lindahl Nobel Laureate Laboratory located in the 7th affiliated hospital in the Guangming district. So this became a big event, and also on the TV news. And then we went back, and this is my boss, my ex-boss, Axel. This is Sir Thomas, and so we were in Crick at that time. And this is of course my and Ying also with Gambling's lab, and they published several Nature level paper. But also from my own team, as we published a much smaller paper, but I think progress is still being made. So we published several small paper, and here I think it's now 24. So reviews and small papers.
I think that's an excellent way to go, because otherwise, if you just try to concentrate on getting one remarkable paper into Nature or Science, something like that, it can take so much time and not work out at the end. It's much better to publish in a less prestigious journal and just move on and accumulate data that way. Yeah. And
Thank you, sir.
The mass of those data will have some impact.
We wish Professor Sir Thomas and Madame and good health, and continue to guide our lab members to climb new peaks. Oh my God! Sorry, this is totally in Chinese.
You like drinking wines a lot, but however, obviously alcohol damages your DNA. So what do you think of this balance?
Yes, obviously large amounts of alcohol can be very damaging. Yeah? Mm-hmm. I think it's more like exposure to sunlight. Some people think it's a good idea on their vacation to lie for hours in the hot sun, and that's actually quite dangerous, because you have an increased risk of skin cancer that way. Yeah? And although most skin cancer is relatively benign, there are also dangerous forms of skin cancer. That doesn't mean that one should avoid going out in the sun. It's good for you, it's a pleasant feeling, and so on. And that's the way I think about drinking a couple of glasses of wine a day. I don't think it's dangerous to me. But I think it's important then also some of the problems with drinking is that in addition to ethanol, there are higher alcohols which are no good for you. And your body feels that because if you drink a lot of cheap material, you get a headache the next day. Hangover. Besides being unpleasant, I think that's also could be dangerous. So if one is going to drink wine, don't drink cheap wines. Drink a smaller amount of a better wine.
Any good recommendation?
Plenty.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the ones you just brought.
Good choice.
These are relatively expensive wines, so they don't have to go up in that price range. But you have to be careful with the very cheapest wines that when you taste them, they don't taste very good, and then you have a headache the next day. It's just not worth drinking wine like that. Drink less of something that's better.
Yeah, I think actually quite a few of us carry this aldehyde dehydrogenase mutation.
Yeah.
So we are like less alcohol tolerant. So we accumulate, ethanol to aldehyde, and that's very like the thing that damages our DNA. So definitely, problem.
That is true. It's quite common in Japan and China that people have poor tolerance of metabolizing alcohol. And I think today, if you fall in that group, just avoid alcohol. Don't have wine or beer or whiskey or whatever. It's just one of those things. But
luckily, I'm not in that group.
And probably, I don't know right now the exact numbers, but it might be something like a third or a large proportion of the people who cannot metabolize alcohol this way. And then right now, they should definitely abstain. But that doesn't mean that people, like most people in Europe and the United States, like me, it occurs here, but perhaps it's only 1 or 2% rather than 30% who can't metabolize alcohol. And I feel sorry for them, and at least I can deal with a glass of wine, and I'm going to continue metabolizing my glass of wine.
So, Thomas, do you think in the next several decades we might be able to reverse aging? Because DNA damage or genome instability is one of the biggest hallmarks of aging. Do you think from a perspective of DNA repair we will be able to reverse aging someday?
I strongly doubt it, because during evolution, which has taken a long time, our bodies have been constructed so that you wear out time. I notice it now when I'm getting old. My eyesight isn't as good, my hearing isn't as good anymore. And I get tired more easily and so on. And I think to be able to reverse all this is unlikely. The important thing is to avoid premature aging. Yeah? We should all be able to become, let's say, 100 years old. But to become 500 years old, I don't think our bodies are constructed that that's feasible. And if you have had 100 years of life, and importantly, life with good mental quality all the time. So if you could do something about preserving your mental capabilities until old age, that's important. And then we will just accept that somewhere around 100 years or so, it's time to start fading away.
Are there any new scientific advances that you are particularly interested in?
Well, right now I'm too old to have a lab anymore, so
By other people?
with other people. I think there's a lot of exciting progress, and also in fields like DNA, my own field of DNA repair. There's still many more things that need to be explained and hasn't been studied at all enough. And thanks to work by John Hoymakers and many other scientists, we have a good correlation between DNA repair and aging. So that if we understand DNA repair, we'll also understand aging much better.
Yes. We have two special guests from China, Dr. Yeyan Zhang and Dr. Yun Zhang, that will join us online to continue our discussion.
There is an interview from Sparkx from Jin Kun. So it's a very nice young fellow was trying to promote the translation from young scientists. And we are really appreciating the work he's doing in London. So here I have quite an experienced mentor of this translational work of what I'm doing in China. So here is Dr. Yeyan Zhang, and he's the founder of a biotech incubator. It's quite a famous biotech incubator in China.
Okay.
And he has a lot of experience to help young scientists translate their work. And I was trying to ask a few questions because obviously you are in the frontier of a lot of basic research, and for young research these days is how we decide to choose the academic paths and the translational paths. Sometimes in the lab we can find some valuable projects which can translate into the drug discovery or pharmaceutical companies. Do you have any suggestions or opinions for students like doing such projects?
Well, it's obviously important that our work gets translated, but still, if you don't do a lot of basic research and have a foundation in basic research, you'll soon run out of things to translate. So I still think that the most important aspect of whatever you are trying to do is to have a good foundation of basic research. Obviously, if we have some new interesting results from basic research, in my experience, there are usually people who are interested in applying that, and that should be done, of course. You don't do basic research just to put the results on the shelf. You want them to be applied. But if the work is important and gives new opportunities for research, I think that's not so difficult to convince people that you have a new approach and it deserves to be tried. But to have the original basic finding, something new that people didn't know about before, that won't come by itself. It requires some determined work to do good basic research. And that will then more or less automatically result. If the work is really interesting, many people will be eager to apply it.
Yeah. So we need to have both curiosity-driven research and translational applied research.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tomas.
Thank you.
Quite nice. Basic research was kind of resource for all the translation studies. I just introduced Dr. Yeyan Zhang, and because he's had years of experience on translation, and he wants to have a short discussion with you, probably on this topic.
Hi, Thomas and Brenda.
Hello.
Hello.
It's a pleasure. I did most of my education in the U.S., and my current work is on technology transfer and investment. Gene therapy has been a focus for many medical needs. Do you see the application of gene editing or gene therapy coming into the medical field in the very near future?
Gene therapy is going to be much discussed, and I think the first steps now, which is conceptually important, is to choose a couple of inherited diseases where we think we know what we are doing and show that they can be corrected by gene therapy. And I think many people will agree that this would be correct to do this. If there's a mutation, we know what the mutation is, and that mutation is a cause of a serious disease. We can, in that individual, remove the mutation and correct it to the normal sequence, and then the disease will be gone. So I don't see any long-term problem with that. The problem comes next when there are less obvious applications. Many people think that perhaps gene therapy will make them smarter or happier or whatever, better, bigger muscles so they get better sportsmen and this kind of thing. And there I think one has to be very careful, of course, which we are. And what is not been discussed so much is if you want to change people, it's a very drastic and clumsy step to do gene therapy that's irreversible, because it is a big step to change something so it can't be reversed. And I think here we have to think about how can we in one individual have the technology so that we can change something but it doesn't continue in future generations. And one way I think would work very well is that we are carriers of several viruses, herpes viruses like Epstein-Barr virus. The fact is about 90% of all of us carry Epstein-Barr virus. And in the great majority of these people, it has no known effects at all. But there is some not very well understood connection there with African Burkitt lymphoma. So if one plays with something, herpes virus like Epstein-Barr virus, one should use a crippled form of it so you can control its progress. And then I think it might be a good idea to put such a virus back into individuals and use that as the host of the foreign DNA. Some people will say that sounds risky, but if you think everything is risky, if you don't want to do anything, and that's one option. But I think this is a much better approach than changing our genome.